I never thought I'd find myself here, sitting on the edge of her sofa, staring at the quiet rhythm of her life, feeling like an intruder and somehow a part of it all at once. The rain was light, just enough to make the street glisten outside the window, and the soft hum of the heater filled the space between us. I should have been nervous, I guess, but there was something else, a pull I didn't understand, and I couldn't ignore. Her name is Clara. She's in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, elegant in a way that doesn't scream for attention. Not like the women I know from my age group. There's a grace in her movements, a subtle confidence that made me immediately aware of how awkward I felt around her. I keep my hands folded in my lap, pretending to study the carpet pattern, but every now and then my eyes wander to her. How she tucks a stray strand of hair behind her ear, how she laughs quietly at her own jokes, how the dim light catches the curve of her jaw, it's distracting. Dangerous, even. I remind myself, her husband isn't here. He asked me to help, said it casually over the phone, like it was a simple favor. Help with the taxes, he said. Help with a broken sink, he said. But sitting here, across from her, I realize he might have underestimated something, the electricity in the air, the way her presence makes my pulse spike and my brain stutter. She notices my glance and tilts her head, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. You don't have to stare, she says softly, but it's not a reprimand. It's teasing. And it throws me further off balance. I look down, forcing a laugh that comes out too loud, too brittle. My hands clench for a second, the way they always do when I'm nervous around someone I shouldn't want this badly. We talk about nothing at first. The rain, the heater, a stray cat that prowled outside earlier. But everything feels charged. I notice the faint scent of her perfume, floral and warm, curling around me like smoke. She brushes her fingers over the edge of the sofa absent-mindedly, and I imagine, stupidly, dangerously, what it would feel like if those fingers brushed mine. There's a quiet confidence in her voice, but also a vulnerability I catch in her eyes when she pauses mid-sentence. She doesn't realize I see it. Or maybe she does, and that's part of why she's dangerous. The room grows warmer, the space between us shrinking with each stolen glance. I tell myself I should leave. That I'm overstepping boundaries. But the words won't come, because she's leaning slightly forward now, as if she's closing a distance that neither of us had permission to cross. My chest tightens. There's something reckless in being near her, something thrilling. And then, suddenly, a sharp ring cuts through the calm. The doorbell. My heart leaps like it's trying to escape my ribs. She freezes, just for a second, her eyes locking with mine. That glance, so fleeting, so loaded, says more than words could. I know, in that moment, that nothing is going to be simple anymore. I stand, caught between leaving and staying, but a part of me, an irrational, reckless part, wants to see what comes next. Because with Clara, I have the strangest, most terrifying feeling, that staying might change everything. I closed the door behind me after the unexpected ring, and Clara's shoulders tensed for a fraction of a second. The mailman, just delivering letters, nothing dramatic, but the pause between us stretched, heavy with unspoken words. I noticed then how careful she is, how every movement seems measured, almost rehearsed. You okay? I asked, voice too soft, almost intrusive. She nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But I saw it, the slight flicker in her eyes, the way her hand lingered on the door frame longer than necessary. Something unspoken hovered between us. She finally sat back on the sofa, curling her legs beneath her like a shield, and I sat opposite her, careful not to close the distance. I guess I haven't had many visitors lately, she admitted, her voice quieter now, vulnerable in a way that made me want to lean forward, to reassure her without words. She told me about her husband, a man I'd only spoken to briefly on the phone, a kind man, but distant in ways she couldn't quite articulate. He works long hours, travels often, leaving her alone in the house they built together. And then there's her past, brief mentions of relationships that ended quietly, painfully, leaving traces she doesn't talk about. I caught glimpses of regret and loneliness in her laughter, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes at first. I found myself revealing small fragments of myself, too, stories of my 20s, my own failures, moments I usually keep buried. How I moved from city to city chasing work I didn't care about, how I loved and lost too quickly, too recklessly. I shouldn't share this with her, someone twice my age, someone forbidden. But the words slipped out anyway, soft confessions in the warmth of her apartment. There's a taboo in everything about this, a sharp edge beneath the warmth. I remind myself constantly, she's married. She's older. She's the kind of woman people notice, the kind who should be untouchable. And yet, sitting here, listening to her talk about books she loves, the music that haunts her childhood, the quiet way she touches her coffee cup like it anchors her, I feel drawn to her in a way I can't name. Our conversation drifts into memory, and she tells me about the small garden she used to tend with her daughter, flowers blooming in chaotic beauty. I lean forward, curious, asking questions I shouldn't, but wanting to know every detail. When she describes a stray cat she tried to save years ago, her hand brushes mine accidentally. Neither of us pulls away immediately. The contact lingers. A warmth passes from her fingers to mine. My chest tightens, words choke back, and suddenly the room feels smaller, the world outside irrelevant. We both know it, this is dangerous, fragile, delicious. A shared memory, a brush of skin, a silence that says everything. And in that small, charged moment, I realize that something has shifted. Something fragile has begun between us, and neither of us knows how to stop it. The next few days were a blur. Every text from Clara's husband asking if I'd made it over yet made my stomach twist into knots. And yet, I found myself driving past her street even when I hadn't been asked to come. It wasn't just curiosity, I knew it was something far more dangerous, something that made me forget the rules I'd tried so hard to follow. She greeted me at the door one evening with that same half-smile, the one that always made my chest tighten. "You're early," she said, and I shrugged, pretending casualness. I didn't want to wait. Her apartment smelled like rain-damp wood and her favorite vanilla candle, a small comfort I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I perched on the edge of the sofa, watching her move around the kitchen, pouring wine as though she belonged in a world I was only allowed to peek into. Then there was a knock, not the polite ring of the mailman, but sharp and insistent. My heart leapt. "That must be," she started, but I cut in before she could finish. "Let me." I went to the door, hoping it wasn't him. But no, it was my roommate, Danny. He frowned at me. "Dude, you've been MIA. Where the hell have you been hiding?" I hesitated. I hadn't meant to lie, but I couldn't tell him the truth. "Not yet." Helping a friend," I mumbled. Danny's gaze flicked past me, catching her silhouette behind the half-open door. "Whoa. Didn't know you had a friend like this." His smirk carried all the implications he thought he wasn't making. I felt my face heat up. Clara's hand lingered on the doorframe, tense. "It's okay," she said softly, almost too calmly, but I could hear the edge in her voice. Danny left after a few minutes, oblivious or pretending to be, but the tension didn't lift. Instead, it thickened, pressing against my chest, making my pulse spike. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to calm my racing thoughts. When I turned, she was standing there, arms crossed, a storm behind her eyes I couldn't read. "You're reckless," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. "You can't pretend nothing's happening between us." Her words were a mirror of what I had been feeling, but hearing them aloud made me tremble. "I don't," I started, but she held up a hand. "I know you don't want this." "And I shouldn't either," she whispered, stepping closer. Our eyes met, and I saw it there, the longing, the hesitation, the danger that made it irresistible. I wanted to pull back, to remind myself of boundaries, but my feet refused to obey. The distance closed until we were almost touching, the air between us vibrating with every unspoken thought. I could smell the faint perfume of her neck, her breath shallow. Then the phone rang, her husband's name flashing across the screen. She froze, flinching like the sound was a gunshot. I took a step back instinctively, guilt and desire twisting inside me. It's nothing, she said finally, voice trembling just enough to make me ache. She silenced it, and the silence that followed was louder than any noise. We stood there, 2 heartbeats away from crossing a line neither of us was supposed to, trapped in the pull of something forbidden. I could see her hesitation, the guilt in her eyes, but also the undeniable want, the quiet acknowledgement that we were teetering on the edge of everything we shouldn't touch. She reached for the wine glass she'd set down, fingers brushing mine, and for a second I thought we might, just might, forget the world outside her apartment. But instead, she sighed, stepping back, and I felt the space between us stretch like a chasm. "Why is it so easy to want the impossible?" she murmured. Her words weren't a question. They were a confession. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Instead, I just watched her, memorizing the lines of her face, the curve of her shoulders, the way her eyes flitted away when she realized how long she'd held my gaze. Then, as if testing the fragile boundary we'd built, she reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, close enough for me to feel the heat radiating from her. My hand twitched, almost reaching for hers, but I stopped. The tension lingered, thick and electric, leaving us suspended between restraint and surrender. And in that suspended moment, the doorbell rang again, insistent, demanding attention, shattering the fragile world we'd been holding together in the quiet of her apartment. I froze, caught between stepping forward or stepping back, and she glanced at me, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. Neither of us moved, but the glance we shared said everything we couldn't voice. That line, that boundary, might not hold for long. The apartment felt smaller that night, like the walls themselves were leaning in, eavesdropping on us. Clara had moved closer to the window, looking out at the rain-slick streets, her profile sharp in the dim light. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but my throat was tight, my thoughts tangled with fear and desire. I could feel it in her, something restless, a tension she hadn't been able to mask before. She sighed, a long, shaky sound, and for a moment I thought she might crumble in front of me. I took a cautious step closer. "Why do we keep doing this?" I whispered, though it wasn't a question. My voice carried the weight of everything I'd been holding back, the longing, the guilt, the impossible pull I felt toward her. She turned, eyes glistening with rainlight and something else I couldn't name. "Because," she said slowly, "I can't stop thinking about it. About you. About us." I froze. The words were like fire in my chest. Everything I had told myself, restraint, caution, boundaries, crumbled. My hands trembled, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then came the small, fleeting hint of jealousy that had been simmering beneath the surface. She mentioned an old friend, a colleague she saw sometimes, and I felt a sharp twist in my chest. I wasn't proud of it. I knew it was irrational. But the thought of her with someone else, of her attention being anywhere but here, made my stomach turn and my hands clench. I don't like it," I admitted before I could stop myself, my voice low, strained. "I don't like thinking of you with anyone else." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight between us shifted, heavy with truth. She stepped closer, just enough for our shoulders to brush. That small touch sent a jolt through me, electric and dangerous. I wanted to close the distance completely, to see if the line we'd drawn could finally vanish. "Don't," she whispered, but the word carried a tremor of desire, not command. She was as torn as I was. Her lips parted slightly, and I caught a breath I didn't know I was holding. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess the storm in my chest, but the fear of losing control, or losing her entirely, stopped me. My hand twitched toward hers, and she didn't move away. She just let it hang there, a hair's breadth from contact, like the world had paused to let us decide. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like a warning. Inside, the room held its own quiet thunder. Neither of us spoke, but the tension was deafening, filling every corner of the space between us. And then, a knock at the door. Sharp. Unexpected. We both turned, hearts hammering. Whoever it was, I knew instantly that the fragile, suspended world we'd created in this apartment, the moments of longing, the unspoken confessions, the temptation, was about to collide with reality. I glanced at her, our eyes locking, and I could see it there, the same question reflected back at me. Would we finally cross the line, or would something force us to step back? And in that single heartbeat, I realized neither of us could take back what was already in motion. The knock at the door wasn't another delivery. My stomach sank as Clara hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. "It's him," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear, but I caught it. Her voice trembled, not with fear, exactly, but with a tension I hadn't seen before. Before she could react, I heard a faint voice from the hallway, familiar, casual, terrifying all at once. "Clara? You here?" Her husband. Time slowed. The wine glass in her hand wobbled. I felt my chest tighten so sharply it hurt. Every instinct screamed at me to vanish, to escape, but my feet refused. The moment was broken, yet alive with danger, fragile and electric. Clara turned to me, eyes wide, a mixture of panic and something I couldn't name, guilt, maybe fear. Her hand reached for mine instinctively, just for a second, a silent plea. My pulse throbbed as I realized how close we'd come to crossing a line that now felt razor-sharp. We need to be careful," she said, voice low but trembling. I nodded, though my brain screamed contradictions. Careful? I'd been careful for days, and it had only made this worse. The proximity, the glances, the unspoken desires, all of it had built a tension we couldn't ignore. Then, as if the universe wasn't done testing me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my roommate, Danny. "Dude, you won't believe what I saw when I stopped by earlier. Just, be careful." Seriously. I stared at the screen, a sinking feeling spreading through my chest. He'd seen us, or at least something. Maybe not the close, desperate tension in the room, but enough to know there was something between us. My hands shook, my stomach knotted, and I realized the illusion of safety we'd been holding onto was gone. Clara's eyes met mine, and I could see it mirrored there, the fear, the betrayal, the knowledge that the world outside had crept into our fragile bubble. We can't let anyone find out," she whispered, almost to herself. I swallowed hard. "I know," I said, though the words felt empty. The danger made the pull between us stronger, more urgent, more impossible to ignore. And in that same instant, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. The risk didn't scare me. It drew me closer to her. She stepped back, running a hand through her hair, trying to regain composure, but the subtle tremor betrayed her. The twist, the intrusion of reality, the shadow of discovery, had turned every heartbeat into a live wire. And then, for a fleeting second, she glanced at me, her lips parting slightly, eyes glinting with something I hadn't seen before, recklessness, longing, defiance. She made a choice without words, a choice that whispered, "We're already in this. There's no turning back." The knock at the door, the warning message, the tremor in her voice, it all collided into one pulse of tension that left us suspended on the edge of something irreversible. I realized, then, that nothing could remain the same. What we had, what we were becoming, was out in the open, fragile, dangerous, irresistible. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside wet and glimmering under the streetlights. Inside, the air felt heavier than ever, thick with all the things we hadn't said, all the risks we hadn't admitted aloud. Clara stood near the window, her back to me, shoulders tense, fingers gripping the curtain. I could see every heartbeat in the slight rise and fall of her chest. "I can't keep doing this," she said suddenly, turning to face me. Her voice was firm, but quivering at the edges, like a tightly drawn bow about to snap. "It's reckless. Wrong." And yet, I stepped closer, every nerve in my body screaming that the line we'd danced around for days was about to vanish. "And yet?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though it carried every ounce of desire and fear I'd bottled up. Her eyes softened, glimmering with unshed tears, and I saw everything reflected there, the longing, the guilt, the small, quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, we could step across the line without losing ourselves. "I don't want to lie anymore," she admitted, voice breaking. I can't pretend I don't feel it. I can't ignore it, and I don't want to. My heart slammed against my ribs. Every boundary, every caution I'd clung to, evaporated in the heat of her confession. I swallowed hard, trembling, because saying what I felt aloud was terrifying. And yet, somehow, necessary. I don't want to either, I said, stepping even closer, my hand brushing the edge of hers. I've tried to keep it under control, but I can't. Not with you. Not now. She drew a shuddering breath, and then, slowly, impossibly, she reached out, her fingers grazing mine. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it sent a jolt straight through me, igniting every nerve ending. We stood there, suspended, on the edge of something irreversible. The apartment seemed to shrink, the rain outside forgotten. My mind screamed that it was dangerous, that it was reckless, that there would be consequences we couldn't yet imagine. But my heart had already decided. Her lips parted slightly, just a breath away from mine. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint scent of her perfume, the tremor of hesitation that made it all the more intoxicating. The world outside didn't exist anymore. Only us. And then, a sharp sound, the muffled click of a lock somewhere down the hall. My pulse skipped, fear mingling with desire. She looked at me, eyes wide, and I saw the same thought mirrored there, we're exposed. But it didn't matter. Do we? I started, words failing me, because the answer was written in every tremor, every glance, every unspoken confession. She nodded slightly, a tiny, defiant motion, and I understood. We had chosen, love over fear, honesty over silence. Messy, human, and inevitable. We didn't kiss yet, not fully. But the space between us was charged, alive, and impossible to ignore. The boundary had shattered in our minds, even if reality still waited outside the door. And in that suspended heartbeat, I realized that whatever came next, we had crossed a point of no return. The city was quiet the next morning, unnervingly quiet. The rain that had soaked the streets the night before had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening like a mirror reflecting what was left of them. Anna stood at the corner cafe where it had all begun, fingers wrapped around a cup that had long gone cold. She hadn't slept. Neither had Daniel. The night's events, the confession, the argument, the truth that had torn open the last layer between them, had left them both raw, vulnerable, almost empty. But emptiness had a strange kind of peace in it. When Daniel finally appeared across the street, their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. They didn't need words, too many had already been spoken. Too many promises made, broken, reshaped into something they could finally live with. He crossed the road slowly, every step heavy with the weight of choice. You came, he said quietly. Anna smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and relief. I said I would. They stood in silence for a while, the air between them no longer charged with what-if tension, but with something gentler, acceptance. I'm leaving town, Daniel said, voice barely above a whisper. I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone for you. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. I think that's what love really is, she said. Knowing when to let someone find themselves. He looked at her, eyes full of both gratitude and ache. You made me see myself differently, Anna. For better or worse, I'll never forget that. And I'll never forget you, she replied softly. But we can't keep standing in the same storm, hoping it'll turn into sunshine. For the first time in weeks, he laughed quietly, a real, tired, human laugh. Then he stepped closer and kissed her forehead. It wasn't romantic this time. It was a benediction. A thank you. A goodbye. When he walked away, she didn't call after him. Didn't cry. She just watched him until he disappeared into the crowd, a blur of color and movement swallowed by the city. Later that day, Anna went home and opened her journal, the one she had started the day they met. She wrote only one line before closing it forever. Sometimes the people who change us aren't meant to stay, they're meant to show us how to begin again. She placed the journal on her windowsill, beside the small plant Daniel had given her months ago. It had withered once but somehow grown back stronger. Just like her. Outside, the world went on, taxis honking, laughter echoing from nearby streets, sunlight slicing through the clouds. And for the first time, Anna smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because she finally understood that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering, and still choosing to move forward.